it take to change a light bulb? 1 to actually change the bulb, and 9 to say how much they like the old one. Or how about this one? How many Presbyterians does it take to change a light bulb? Well, it should require about 5 committees to review the idea first, and if each is staffed by half a dozen members, that's what, 30? How about this one? How many Presbyterians does it take to change a light bulb? Change? That's the way we've always done it. This month we are talking about Paul and his journeys, talking about what he did to spread the gospel, and we've been on the road again. We have to have this for Jerry if nobody else.
On the road again.
Sing it with me.
Just can't wait to get on the road again. Life I love is making music with my friends. I can't wait to get on the road again.
All right,
On the road again.
we are on the road again. Paul was on the road again, and today we are touching briefly on Paul's 3rd missionary journey. This missionary journey took 4 years. They've gotten progressively longer, and it covered about 2,500 miles. It's like walking or sailing to Sioux Lookout and sailing and walking around or through Lake Huron and Lake Superior and then coming back again. And these 4 years were not all taken up with the walking. He stopped in many places. According to Acts, he traveled through the region of Galatia and Phrygia. And as he said, he did it to strengthen, teach, and rebuke the believers. And then he traveled to Ephesus. And Ephesus was an important center for early Christianity. And Paul spent 3 years there. He spent it teaching and preaching, but he supported himself by being a tent maker, as he had done when he was in Corinth. He also spent a great deal of time writing letters to the churches that he had already established. And we recognize those as 1st and 2nd Corinthians, those letters, as well as others. And he claimed to perform many miracles. And in the passage just prior to the piece we read this morning, it talks about people bringing handkerchiefs that touched Paul and using those handkerchiefs to cure people with disease. It is true that he taught often and taught well. And he also enabled others to teach and to preach. And he sent many missionaries from Ephesus through him to other parts of Asia. And he did not leave Ephesus until just after this passage that we read today, when things got a little heated and things got a little hot. And he left Ephesus. And in fact, as I researched the theater in Ephesus, we find out that this passage in Acts is mentioned in all kinds of secular readings and articles because it was an important event in the history of Ephesus. Let's look at a hall, this theater. Next slide. This is the theater in Ephesus where Paul preached. Next one. It's made up of stone seats, and they would hold 25,000 people. And if you think wooden pews with cushions are hard, try sitting on those stone seats. Next one. And Paul would have preached from right there in the middle. When I was in Ephesus a number of years ago, I actually got to stand on the same place that Paul would have preached, and for me that was pretty amazing. And it is said, and it's true, that if you stand right there and speak in just a regular voice, that you can be heard all the way to the top of those 25,000 seats. The acoustics are so amazing in there. He preached every day, with the exception of the Sabbath. And he preached between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. because that was the time that the theater was free. It was used to teach in the morning, and it was used to teach and have drama and even gladiator games in the evening. But during the heat of the day, it was empty. And that's when Paul preached. And you have to imagine that standing in this giant stone bowl in the middle of the desert sun in the Middle East in a hot day, how uncomfortable this would have been. Any of you who have ever sat in Iverwin Stadium in July knows it gets hot. There's no air movement. And this is where Paul preached because he was convinced that he had to share the gospel. And this was a place where thousands could gather to hear it. And it was exceedingly uncomfortable, not only for Paul, but for those sitting there. But he did it because he wanted, as it says, the word of the Lord to spread widely and grow in power. And the people sitting there were so enthralled with the message that they sat there. And then they went out to share the good news they'd heard. And it was this sharing that got them into trouble. We heard in our scripture reading that things were changing in Ephesus and people were getting more than a little upset. There were concerns that people would stop worshiping the goddess Artemis. But more than that, they were concerned, Demetrius and the other silversmiths, that any money they were generating from making up little silver idols of Artemis would be gone. It came down to not worshiping, but commerce. They were concerned the money would dry up. Sometimes in our lives, we are challenged with things changing, life changing, challenges that we have. Things are turning out differently than we had ever hoped they would. And when we're faced with these challenges, quite often if we don't change, we run the risk of getting what we really need or what we should want. Think of getting married. If when you got married, your behavior, your lifestyle did not change, if you continue to go out evenings and date all kinds of people and go out with your friends partying every night, how well would that have worked for you? Not well. Sometimes our behavior has to change in order for us to get to where we need to be. It's absolutely necessary. We can't continue to say, but that's the way we've always done it, and expect that our lives will be any different, that society will be any different. Think slavery and segregation. If that had not changed, how much more pain and how much more hurt would we have? We still feel the effects of segregation. How many decades later? The pain in the US in the last few weeks is certainly recognizing that fact. Think gender equality in the workplace. Think women going to work outside the home. How many of us would have the lifestyle that we have if both spouses had not worked outside the home for some or part of their marriage? In our faith lifestyles, how many of us think our churches can continue saying, that's the way we've always done it, and survive for the next generations? The way. This is the phrase that's used to refer to the early Christians, people of the way of Jesus Christ. That's how they were referred to. If they had not changed their lives, changed their culture, changed their values, changed who they worshiped, would we be here today? If the church had never changed, we would be Jewish. But it did change. Jesus Christ, the way of change, the way forward, made that happen. When we recognize that without Jesus Christ, we would be back in Ephesus, we have to recognize that what he did mattered. What he did was important. If we had not changed, if they had not changed, it would be as if Jesus Christ never existed. But we know he existed. We know he made a difference. We know he railed against the way things were, the way they'd always been done. We know that he challenged the political system of the day. At one point saying, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's and give unto God what is God, in a blatant display of political defiance. He challenged the religious traditions and leaders. How many times do we remember him calling out the Pharisees for doing what they had always done and saying it was right, even though it wasn't? He challenged how things were done in the temple, the way they had done it for centuries, overthrowing the money changers in a fit of anger because this was the house of the Lord. Our Lord, Jesus Christ, didn't hesitate to set himself squarely against the Pharisees' teaching on worship either. He sought to demonstrate that their teaching was contrary to the spirit of God's law regarding worship. They had actually developed schools of thought around their ideas about God, and these schools were taught in this very place, in that theater in Ephesus. These schools, much like our own seminaries, and particularly my seminary, Knox College, these schools actually hindered their growth in faith. They developed ideas and were rigid about them, about how the Sabbath was to be kept. And the traditions that they held on to became for them more important than people. Their schools of thought surrounding religious subjects became their focus rather than God. God and the Messiah were pushed to the background in favor of what we have always done. And trust me, I don't like to be negative about Knox College, but it was very much like that when I was there. There was much focus about the way things should be done rather than the people that would be reached. And those of us who were there took it upon ourselves to pray every morning because we didn't have prayer every morning. And we strengthened each other to keep and hang on to our faith. And I think if we had not done that, I don't think we would have made it. Somewhere along the way, Israel began thinking that obeying the laws instead of looking to the Lord made them holy. And they pushed God out of the picture. The Pharisees reached a point where their gifts and their sacrifices were the object of their worship, much like the silver idols that Demetrius made. They started thinking that it was their religious practices and observances and sacrifices that would save them. And Paul challenged that thinking. And he challenges us today to think and to look at the way we've always done it and to question the rationale behind it. Do we adhere to age-old traditions of the way of the church rather than paying attention to the way of Christ? Do we hang on to the way we've always done it to the detriment of reaching the next generation with the message of hope? Jesus challenged that, Paul challenged that, and he took his message primarily to those who were outside the church. This is not the synagogue. He wanted to reach everyone. And he reached out primarily to those Gentiles, those who had not heard of God, those who had have no idea of what went on in the synagogue. And those people, more than anyone else, needed to hear the message of Jesus Christ. I've had a number of conversations recently that talk about the fact that there are so many people outside the church, and why don't they come back to church? Well, you know what? They were never here. We have generations who have never darkened the doors of our churches, and they would have as much idea of what goes on in here as we do about what goes on in a mosque. They don't know what happens, and it scares them. And we, if we hang on to our traditions and our way of doing church, scares them even more, rather than bringing them the gospel of Jesus Christ. It really didn't matter to Paul if he was in a home or a marketplace or a theater or a synagogue. And it didn't matter if it was done in exactly the way that it had always been done. And in fact, I think Jesus and Paul would have agreed that the status quo needed to be shaken up. Don't do what we've always done. It isn't getting us the results that we want, that we need, that matters. And what matters is the way of Jesus Christ. The message that he taught, the message that he preached, the message that he lived. The way of love and acceptance and peace. All of us go through times in our lives when we wish we knew all the answers, when we want to be sure of what will be. And quite often when we hit that time and it becomes increasingly challenging and increasingly difficult, we look to the past for comfort. We hang on to the present for stability. We hang on to what we've known, what we've understood, what we are sure of. We want things to be the same. We say, but that's the way we've always done it. But if we cling to that, we will never mature. We will never be mature in our faith. We will always be as infants, as children in our understanding. One of the things that I love to see in this last week at BBC was for our young people who have been with us in the last 3 or 4, or this is my 5th year. Those young people, how they have matured in their faith. There was one young man who was a repeat at our BBC and has been coming for a number of years. And let's just say he would present some challenges. He got a little rambunctious. He caused some little disturbances. But this year, we had him as one of our youth leaders in training. Being with a group of our children, leading them, guiding them through their day. And you know what? He was amazing. He was patient. He was mature. He was caring. And if we had continued to let him be just a participant, if he had continued to be one of the gang, if we had said, but that's the way we've always done it, we wouldn't have seen this transformation. We have times in our lives when we are challenged, when we are not happy. Heck, sometimes we look back and we have whole chapters where we say, I wish it had been different. And we say, that's the way we've always done it. But I don't want to do it that way anymore. And we wonder if we have the will or the courage or the strength to change it. Let's face it, it's easier to keep doing what we've always done, isn't it? To shake things up, well, that's going to cause all kinds of problems. Maybe not on the riotous scale that Paul had, but it is still going to cause upset. And we may not like it. And the people around us may not like it. and our lives will never be the same. And we won't know what tomorrow will bring, and that's really uncomfortable for us. But Jesus didn't come to this earth for us to be comfortable. He didn't come to this earth so that we would be timid. He didn't teach us about love and grace so that we could lead a life of mediocrity. He didn't die an agonizing death on the cross so we would be comfortable. He did all of those things so that we would have life and have it abundantly, as he says in John chapter 10. When that's not the way we've always done it, isn't going to work anymore. And trust me, you will know when that happens. You'll know because the apathy that you're carrying will be chased by unease. The comfort that you're feeling will be poked and prodded by the desire to do something different, something better. When that moment comes, turn to Jesus. Turn to God. There you can find the will, the courage, the strength that you need to make the difference that you need in your life. There you will find the one who can take the mess of your life and make you the person that you are meant to be. There you will find the one who created you perfectly in love and who says, that's how I meant it to be.